cut and bleeding to death, which can take up to 6 minutes, as we would. Therefore today, should they be pre-stunned, and now, with agriculture, hardly any of the world's people have to eat meat, so have to kill to live. So would you agree that today, Moses and Muhammad would be vegetarians?
Thank you, Jazakumullah. Thank you for the answer. I'll begin with the first part of the answer first. I believe in the validity of religious practices all over the world of partaking of animal flesh. I think there is nothing in it which is against the overall grand plan of God, who is all compassionate and all merciful. He must be understood in the reflective mirror of nature he has created and the history of evolution, which is better known to us today than ever before. You see, the level of consciousness is different at different stages of life. And killing of other animals situated at lower orders is a law in nature, not an exception. Despite the fact that some animals are known to be vegetarians, even these vegetarians eat up a lot of living things. I'm not talking of bacteria, insects, worms, and so many things become a daily part of the diet of the so-called vegetarian animals. So if you study the issue, you must study in this wider canvas of the behavior of life. And there we find that big fish eats the smaller fish, and it is a law of nature, and it is not against the compassion of God. If it were so, there will be no evolutionary movement forward, and the life would get stuck at very rudimentary stages of its creation. So, one thing I apologetically point to you is that to understand the concept of compassion must require a wider study of the overall plan of God's creation. Without reference to it, you can't understand that compassionability. One lesson, however, we draw from that is that what is important in that plan of God is higher quality in relation to the lower quality. The numbers do not matter, the quality matters. And that is the directive force of evolution. Quality is never sacrificed for the sake of number. Number is always sacrificed for the sake of quality. Even in human birth, at every time a child is conceived, the same phenomenon takes over. Millions of potential cells with possibilities of creating creating new babies, if they find a matching ovum, of course, potentially they have that qualities. They are wasted for the sake of just one single fortunate cell which ultimately reaches its goal. And there it is always the phenomena of the survival of the fittest. So survival of the fittest is a law which does operate in nature and also in religion philosophies. But it takes different shapes. So permission to eat the animal flesh is drawn not only from one stray religious injunction, but it is drawn from the overall philosophy of the life, its plan on things, and how it interrelates with other members of life of different species. But in the same species, except for the rudimentary, elementary case of the sea life, you do not find it a common practice for animals to kill each other. Even in the world of beasts, lions, tigers, wolves, hungry packs of wolves do not eat other fellow beings of their own sort. So that is the second lesson. Compassion is confined in relation to a certain species far more than in relation to the lower species. And the lack of compassion which you find is compensated in them by their lack of compassion to other things of lower order. So it's a much larger scheme of crime and punishment, if you call it, or what is called, I'm sorry, that phrase, cause and effect, which you find everywhere manifested in nature. So to that much for the concept of compassionability. I believe that man is at the summit of the creation. And the Holy Quran repeatedly says that everything is created to serve the cause of man and to make him ultimately perfect what he is. As such, once man is created, divine laws take over from the laws of nature which subconsciously work in every form of life. There are subconscious laws, or intuitions you may call them. But when man reaches the stage of awareness of man, suddenly new worlds are revealed to him which he has not even remotely touched. The universe expands and his vision of existence transcends the material limits and extends into heaven and heavenly, God and godly spirits, etc., which had never happened before in life. So that is an object. At this stage of awareness, he is taught consciously, in principles, that which is fed into life as laws of nature. And there he is given a choice. So unless he is given the choice between compassion and cruelty, he is not fit with either reward or punishment. So reward and punishment go hand in hand with the concept of option. And as such, compassion is also built by certain measures taken by all religions. And one's brushing with elements of cruelty is also experienced in everyday life. You sacrifice some small thing for the sake of a higher order, higher gain. Even in children who are suffering from a bad abscess, one has to apply the knife and the child suffers. Even when the child is sent to the schools, he suffers. He cries, sometimes he kicks the parents who are forcibly removing from the home to the school. And yet he is forcibly removed. Is it not a contradiction between compassion and cruelty? Certainly not. These are apparent problems. Deep inside, there is the same message of higher objectives prevailing over the lower requirements of a situation. So, trouble, pain, punishment will run along. You can't do away with that. And their existence does not contradict the compassionability of God. But compassion must remains